Now, for a review of what's making the headlines and the papers this morning, let's bring in Vimbai in the commercial nerve center of Lagos. I'm sure you've got something very exciting for us.
Absolutely, but Benga, I hate to burst your bubble. Today is all about the economy, Senator Natasha, and Donald Trump in that order. So let's get straight into it. We begin with This Day, our sister publication, which we also know to be the newspaper of record. This Day newspaper is leading with economic news. Monetary easing begins as CBN cuts MPR to 27%, cites GDP growth falling inflation. And the rider there also says, Cardoso, our goal is to achieve single-digit inflation, and 14 banks have fully met new capital thresholds. Of course, this is the news that broke yesterday with regards to some of the easing that the central bank has started doing with the economy to try and make business a little bit easier. Now, what we know from the principles of economics, of course, is that when inflation is high, the central bank must tighten, meaning they must increase their interest rates so that people don't have easy access to credit. And now, the private sector has complained about this. Everybody has felt the pinch because, of course, we know that with all going on, they've needed a higher access to credit to be able to weather the economic storms. If you remember, at some point, even Dangote was complaining that 30% interest rate, lending rate, makes it almost impossible for one to be able to do business, let alone try to expand or grow. So this decrease in the interest rate was largely expected. However, the 50 basis points that were done seem to not be well received by most of the private sector. Everybody from the organized private sector to NECA and various leading economists have said that, well, this does nothing for us. 0.5%, going from 27.5% to 27%, doesn't really affect our bottom line in any ways. However, I think it's also important to acknowledge that this is signaling. This is the central bank saying that things are moving in the right direction, and as things progress, maybe there's more that can be done and more can be done to try and ease the business environment. Because what we know, of course, we need productivity, we need jobs. The GDP numbers came out yesterday, they were impressive, and they say that this also contributed to the central bank making this slight movement in the right direction, just to assure all players in the economy and, of course, investors that things are moving in the right direction, and maybe it was more of a show of good faith, than anything that will really impact the economy. Benga, I'll come to you very quickly. Your thoughts on just 0.5% of the interest rate?
Okay, I think what this does is that it's a signal to boost investors' confidence, and also you could see that some sectors of the private operators are also have also welcomed this development. The CBN governor has shown consistency so far, also being able to curb speculative activities in the forex market, and also you know that there is no way that they will control for the country to control inflation, that it will not keep its interest rate high. So because what does that is that it's going to control liquidity in the economy. So because once there is access to that liquidity, then it will definitely trigger inflation. But another beautiful thing that we can see in the economy is that the alignment, the fiscal and monetary policy alignments between the coordinating minister of the economy and the CBN governor has really shown a lot of consistency. For 5 months now, we've been having a steady growth, even though it's marginal. A lot of people have said that the interest rate, the inflation needs to come down to a single digit. What precisely is a single digit, we still do not know. But be that as it may, there is still a bit of uncertainty in the economy. But for now, it's the stability which everyone has acceded to is a signal that investors can now come to invest in Nigeria's economy. And so when we see a framework that has shown strong appetite for private sector engagement. It shows that the economy is heading for growth. But be that as it may, we still need to keep a watchful eye on the economy, especially the trade policy, the industrial policy needs to be mopped up. Because when we look at the sectorial performance yesterday, we noticed that the manufacturing sector is still a bit low. And also, when you look at the revenue results yesterday, that moved from 701 billion naira to about 3.6 trillion naira, recording about 401%. It shows that there's a significant growth. But be that as it may, this culture of impunity, which we raised yesterday, we didn't see the figures from the NMPC, which is a central powerhouse in the nation's economy. So there is a need for a thorough alignment of the fiscal policy, the monetary policy, the industrial policy, and the trade and investment policy, so that we can have a steady growth rate in the economy.
Right. And Benga, like you're saying, I think also this conversation is about how does it translate to the people and to just the general improvement in the livelihood of the average Nigerian who reads this headline and says, okay, how does this impact me? So, yes, but it leads us to our next story, because I always like to say, tax is the government's hand in the lives of citizens. How our tax is spent is supposed to be obvious all around us, because it is supposed to ease some of the burdens.
Absolutely.
Whether it be around healthcare or whether it be around infrastructure. So that takes us to our next headline, which is from FIRS, from the FIRS boss, Zach Adedeji, who I think also needs to be commended for holding that media parley yesterday. Not something we see often, but I think it was good that they invited journalists, State House correspondents, to a conversation to unpack some of the critical issues around revenue generation. Zach Adedeji justifies external borrowing amid 3.64 trillion naira revenue boost. So he is arguing that there is now a paradigm shift in the government's borrowing attitude, that because they're reaching their non-oil revenue targets from various sectors, that the money that Nigeria borrows will now be channeled into infrastructure financing, productive investment, and gone are the days of us borrowing to pay salaries or to pay subsidies. Now, Yolanda, I'll come to you. I know that with economic policies, it takes time for us to begin to see the impact or the effect. But just from your perspective and what you see around you, are you starting to see the impact of a over 400% increase in tax revenue from the government? Are you seeing the government's hand in the lives of citizens around you that shows that revenue generation has shot up by over 400%?
Unfortunately not, Vimbai, and you've brought up a couple of points in those questions, those rhetorical questions that you've been asking, that really just point to what is being said versus what we are actually seeing. It's been a couple of months since we've heard from the World Bank when they first started bringing out this report saying that, okay, Nigeria is doing so much better than it was before. But that's when we started questioning, okay, this is what the data is saying, but in reality, how does that translate to the everyday person? And for weeks, we have been talking about this in different ways. A few weeks ago, we were with Tayo Oyedele, correct me if I'm wrong on that name, and he was speaking to us about, the tax that we're expecting to see, the new tax reforms that we're expecting to see in January. And Vimbai, you brought up a very critical question. We have all these sources giving all this data and this information, but for the everyday person, it's not visible. It's not visible yet. And like you've rightly, brought out as well, this is something that's going to take time. It's going to take time before we are able to see these results. But I think more than anything, the average Nigerian person is actually yearning to see how that translates into everyday living. Just last week, we were speaking about the situation in the market with the food prices that are going down, with food becoming more affordable. Some people allude that to, the season, the rainy season, the harvest. people, you know, being able to harvest their crops, so invariably the price would go down. But we don't know where we stand at the moment. And I think with just a little more time, we'll be able to see whether this data really translates into everyday progression for the everyday person.
Absolutely, very well said. And we'll also be waiting to see how all of these loans are going to be dispatched, since, you know, we've now been told that loans will no longer be used for unproductive causes, but rather only to fuel productivity in the economy. But speaking of productivity, let's go to Punch newspaper. I'm sorry if you have an economics overload, but this is what the papers are giving us today. Punch newspaper says 8.41 trillion naira oil theft drains economy, fuels investors' doubts. Now, this is as the NUPRC is celebrating the fact that oil theft losses have reached their lowest in 16 years. However, you know, again, analysts are skeptical about that. But just to dig into the numbers, if you look at just the year 2021, over 37 million barrels of oil were lost due to oil theft, metering problems, and so forth. However, if you look at the statistics from January to July of 2025, that number has reduced drastically to 2 million barrels. So the NUPRC is citing that the implementation of the PIA, that's a Petroleum Industry Act, and technological deployment is what we need to give credit to for this improvement. However, critics are saying that this is not enough. They're saying that what is needed is stronger governance in that sector, transparency, community buy-in, and prosecutor of offenders, because we often hear about the destruction of all of these black market oil refineries. I know Ovieteme George does a fantastic job of bringing us those reports, but we never hear what happens to the people, to the perpetrators of these crimes. So generally, of course, we know the importance of oil to our economy and to our fiscal budget as well, since we're coming from revenues and so forth. But the opacity continues in this industry, and you know, analysts have rightfully become skeptical, and they're saying, there's an analyst who was quoted in this report who even says, how do we even know that this 2 million barrels number is even real? We really don't know. Benga, how do we move forward?
This is a very sad commentary, if I must say. Over 8 trillion naira lost to oil theft. You recall when the president came into power, one of the first mandates he gave to the security apparatus was to curb oil theft, because that was the biggest drain pipe of the nation's economy. So there is no way we could set forth at dawn to come up with, no matter how ambitious, and we're draining. So it's like taking a few steps forward and several steps backward. So we've come up with a lot of economic reforms. We've very audacious one, laudable one in the international community. But now this is a huge setback. So what's the nation's security agency doing? It's not good enough to say that, to compare failures with abysmal failure by saying that this is the best performance in 16 years. Over 8 trillion naira could do a lot to the economy. Just like the executive secretary of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Authority said yesterday, that the 8 trillion naira is enough to build about 150 large-scale companies in the country. So it's a real anticlimax to Nigeria's economic roadmap and the nation's economic future. So I think the president really needs to wield the big stick. The security agencies in charge, because I understand that the NSCDC is in charge of protecting the nation's critical assets. And I think the Nigerian military could step up to assist in this way. I understand that the naval forces also in this is also saddled with this task. We understand the progress that they've made, but if we continue to have 8 trillion naira loss, leakages in the nation's economy from the main cash cow, it does not speak well to the nation's economy. And if we are having this kind of leakage, it speaks to the fact that some people are milking up. Some people are cashing out from this circuit. So
That's
there's a
right.
need to break
and
the
that's
supply
exactly
chain.
what I was going to say. Is that we know that there are private companies that are now contracted to do oil pipeline surveillance. So where's the
Absolutely.
accountability
That's
here?
why I've always
But again,
insisted that this country is being run in a black market model. There is a parallel model. Sometimes the nation is faced in a
Benga,
particular direction.
those are strong
and
words.
then we
Those are
have the
strong words.
back door. That's the honest truth.
Okay,
It's just
but
calling
let's
on the
also
government
remember,
that have been doing
let's also
excellently.
remember, yes,
Okay.
but let's also celebrate the fact that those leakages are said to have reduced, you know, from, if you look at 2021, over 37 million barrels to 2 million barrels in 2025. Yes, we still have a problem.
I concede.
However, you know, some work is being done.
But I'm just being optimistic. I'm just being fascinated with the 8 trillion naira, what it could do to improve the economy, which is obvious to everyone.
It's a huge, absolutely. Absolutely, and you're absolutely right on that. To another topic that most of us cannot agree on, Senator Natasha Akpoti is also there on the front page of the of Punch newspaper, which says Natasha resumes at Senate, calls Akpabio dictator. Vanguard newspaper has this in a bolder headline, says Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan storms Senate office, resumes duties. That's on the front page of Vanguard, thank you. Defamation, FG alleges plot to scuttle Natasha's trial. And now, of course, we saw those images yesterday where her office was unsealed and then she gained access to her office. She had several supporters around her, as she has had consistently through this journey. Yolanda, looking at the defamation case, which was one of the bigger bones of contention going on between herself and Senator Godswill Akpabio, they're now saying that this case may not be heard because of jurisdiction, you know, technicalities. And I think a lot of us get disappointed when cases that are supposed to be this significant, that are supposed to test certain laws, the defamation law, especially between such powerful people, would have been quite intriguing for us to see it being tested. However, now Senator Natasha's legal team are challenging the jurisdiction of that case that was initiated by the federal government and Senator Godswill Akpabio. If you remember, there were allegations that she had defamed them by, you know, accusing them of a plot to assassinate her during an interview on television. But you know, the optics of her coming back into Senate plenary resumes on the 2nd of October. What are your biggest takeaways from Senator Natasha's outing yesterday?
I think something that we can all agree on is that this has just gone too far. It has dragged on for too long. And my takeaways from the images that I saw yesterday were that Senator Natasha seems very calm, very confident in her stance. You know, she has a lot of supporters that have come out with her yesterday, a lot of people who have been standing by her and who continue to stand by her. How this will turn out on the legal side, only time will tell, but it's very unfortunate that this matter has dragged on in such a way for this long. This is one of those cases where I believe we're supposed to, you know, just have worked through it and just probably had some bilateral talks to, you know, just get a solution to everything that has happened. But now what started as, you know, as something that was manageable is now being turned into a ruckus. If you see the images on the screen right now, it shows, you know, people pushing and pulling about how she can go in, and it's just not a good look for the Nigerian Senate. It's really not a good look for the Nigerian Senate, and hopefully when they resume fully, this would have at least come to some sort of a calm.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure we'll all be glued to our screens on the 2nd of October to see how that first session will go, because I'm sure the tension will be the type of tension that you can cut through with a knife. But let's move on very quickly to the Guardian newspaper, which is focusing on international affairs. Of course, we know that the world is gathered in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. This is the 80th edition. The Guardian reports wider cracks in world order amid warnings on aid cuts, Union's future. The leading image there has a nice splash of various leaders, from Donald Trump, Antonio Guterres, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed, Brazilian President Lula da Silva. However, of course, snatching headlines as always was Donald Trump and the mishap on the escalator, issues with the teleprompter as well. But more importantly, Antonio Guterres made a very valid point where he says for every dollar spent on peace in the world currently, $750 are being spent on weapons. Yolanda, so many events took place yesterday at UNGA. What are some of your highlights?
Some of the highlights I have are definitely the things that Trump spoke about, and I will touch on that soon. But what I want to talk about is exactly what you just said, when you pointed out the faulty teleprompter and when you pointed out the escalator as well. To be honest, it gave me a brief sigh of relief, because it showed that indeed, you know, there are human beings that run these organizations. Because I think in Nigeria, we have a lot of those things that happen, and we're really hard on ourselves when we compare ourselves to the world stage and what is happening. Not that I'm saying any of it is right, no, but it also just gives a sigh of relief that, okay, you know, these so-called first world countries face some of these issues as well. But jumping into some of the key points where Trump spoke, you know, he spoke a lot about migration, and it was quite a shocker when he spoke about how countries in Europe should actually, you know, curb migration and stop foreigners from entering into their countries. He was also saying that Europe should stop being so nice and being so polite, and should be, you know, not be politically correct by wanting to bring in migrants. And this as well should be a wake-up call to, you know, countries in Asia and Africa, because it really is a show that we're really not wanted in these places, and we should try and build our own countries. But I digress. He also spoke about climate change, which I found to be, you know, a very Trump thing to say. You know, he was saying that this is the greatest con job ever perpetrated by the world, and that was referring to all the talk on climate change, which is really strange because floods are evidently becoming extreme around the world. We just spoke about a typhoon in parts of Asia, and you know how China is also evacuating people because of all of this flooding. Droughts are going on, heat waves, all these things that are caused by climate change. But Trump claims that climate change predictions were made by, quote, stupid people. So strong words from Donald Trump there. And as well, he spoke on Ukraine and Gaza, but he didn't go too much in giving us new information in this area. But then he also said something of note by saying recognizing Palestine would be a, quote, reward for Hamas. So that was quite a shock, because to say reward amidst what is going on is so you were about to say something, Wimbai?
Yeah, I was about to say that. I mean, it was quite a shocker, I think, given sort of the mood at the this year's General Assembly, which is that everybody is looking for sort of solutions to peace. But, you know, some people are possibly saying this is what happens when Donald Trump doesn't have his teleprompter. Benga, do you prefer a Donald Trump who speaks off the cuff or from his prepared speech?
One thing about such a strong-minded person that has strongly opinionated about international issues and state issues is that you won't miss his points. Donald Trump is just as he is. What you see is what you get. But be that as it may, when you look at the structure of the United Nations, I think there's a lot of question whether it's meeting the international exigencies. You know, after the fall of after the end of the Second World War, which was caused by the German endless seeking for an appeasement, and that led to the failure of the League of Nations. And now, after the Second World War, world leaders and superpowers came up to form the United Nations in 1945. And the mission was to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. But look at what's happening in Gaza, look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening even in Africa, Sudan. And so when you look at Democratic Republic of Congo, have world leaders been able to save generations from the scourge of war? What we've seen is the politicization of peace.
Yes.
Ceasefire deal comes with a lot of politics, a lot of unmatchable conditions. And now I think the rhetoric of a two-state solution, adoption of a two-state, I think it's time that we need to review this and see, find what is a workable solution to all this. Talking about the climate change, we all know that there has been a lot of politicization about the amount of carbon emissions that is permitted. Just recently, everyone congratulated the Enugu State Governor for the coal to power project, but that's also one project that runs contrary to the UN Convention. So we need to look at all this, and in the midst, we need to look at how the national interest.
His administration that it has to be called
because what we've
coal.
seen in the United Nations now is the projection of individual different national interests. So that's the point. So how do we? I think the United Nations and also the exclusion of Africa is also another issue because we have one of the biggest population in the world. So how come such a country that have shown is such a huge market potential, economic potential in the world, and have contributed to world peace and stability, be excluded in the world biggest decision-making process? So it doesn't show fairness, it doesn't show equity.
These are the questions. Of course, that's with regards to the permanent seat on the Security Council. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that were unveiled yesterday. I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways was just what is the role of United Nations now? Because
Trump
one thing
that
did stick out to me was that as much as he has not been entirely successful, Donald Trump has been pushing for peace. Questionable whether he's been successful, but he's been meeting world leaders successively back to back. And we're not seeing the presence of the United Nations.
He claims that he has stopped 7 wars and has met all of their leaders. And exactly like what you've just said, you took the words right out of my mouth. Donald Trump actually said, what is the purpose of the United Nations? And he says it's full of empty words. All they do is bring in policy after policy after policy, but their words are empty. And you know what? He was met with absolute silence, which means that minds are running. People are thinking and actually considering that what he's saying is true.
There's some truth to that. So, I know a lot of people may not like the messenger, but that particular part of the message, I think, rung true to most of us. We'll round up with literally just one sentence from each of you. I think it's important to take that last story from Daily Trust. Daily Trust is reporting that, if you remember, the First Lady, in the lead up to her 65th birthday, had asked that nobody, take out adverts to celebrate her, that nobody send her expensive gifts and so forth, that she would prefer for that money to be converted to donations for a national library project. And so now she's come back to us and let us know that she has raised 20 billion for that library project. A little bit of criticism from all sides. Some people are saying, well, is this really what she's supposed to be doing? I think it's a fantastic way to channel money that many politicians maybe would have used to buy her jewelry or, to take out adverts. Benga and Yolanda, your final thoughts, please. Please, just one sentence each.
It's quite fascinating to see people having that humanitarian focus and calling on people not to waste money on ostentation and focus on the worsening humanitarian condition around the world. Library project does not personally appeal to me. I would rather push what Bill Gates is doing with the recent announcement of over $900 billion, I think $900 million, beg your pardon, to cushion the cost in terms of global diseases. I think that in the age and the moment of a huge funding cut coming from European countries and America taking the lead in this funding cut, it's time for individuals in the world, well-placed individuals in the world, to now come up to show to provide this humanitarian gesture to save Africa, to save the world from the brink, as I may want to put it.
Thanks, Benga. Unfortunately, we don't have time to add more comments to that. But